Yeah, welcome to, thank you. Yeah, welcome to What's New with Cheesecake Brook. So, as many of you know, you've probably seen us out there taking some measurements, taking some pictures, and we're excited to kind of come back to this group and give some reports out on what's been happening on the brook, kind of a little recap of the work that's been done in the last couple of years that the Charles River Watershed Association has been involved with, and then to introduce the project that we're working on now, which is work that's made possible through a coastal zone management grant. So here's a little bit about what to expect today. I'm going to start with some background on the watershed and our organization, which is the Charles River Watershed Association. Um, my colleague Lisa is going to join us to present some of the work that was done around creating a vision for the restoration of Cheesecake Brook in 2019 and through COVID. And then we'll talk about, this current phase of work. So Robert is going to introduce some of what we've seen out on the brook and kind of talk about what the brook looks like from a wildlife perspective. And then Louise will join us to discuss what's happening at the Craft Street field. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to find space for green infrastructure, dealing with the stormwater that's coming into the brook. So first, we really like to start with an acknowledgement that the land we're doing this work on is the homeland of the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, and Wampanoag people. And we try and do this work in a humble way and know that, that they're the real stewards of this land. And a little bit about the Charles River Watershed Association. This is a group that was founded in 1965. We're one of the oldest watershed associations in the country. And we work with 35 municipalities throughout the watershed. We're really focused on making sure that we're taking the steps that need to happen to get to a clean and swimmable Charles River. And that means research and outreach around climate resilience, education, river restoration, river science, and stormwater solutions. A little bit about here we are in the watershed. So the Cheesecake subwatershed is a pretty decent sized watershed within the Charles River. And what happens within this tributary, really does have a major and meaningful impact on the water quality in the rest of the river. I'm going to just hand this over to Lisa to give a bit of history on Cheesecake Brook.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Lisa. I'm the Senior Restoration Program Manager at CRWA, and I recognize a lot of your names from when I was doing this kind of previous vision that we're building off of. So thanks for joining again and sticking with us in this important project. So you all probably recognize this map here. This is a map from the late 1800s of areas requiring drainage in Newton. And you can see the Cheesecake Brook corridor is circled here, and it is a large area in Newton that is requiring drainage according to the folks in the 1800s. And that's exactly what was done. A lot of this area was channelized, the river was channelized, and its natural kind of marshy area was really left for water to go through this one straightened course, which is, of course, what you see here today on the picture on the right. And then we've had a lot of development since then in Newton. The photo on the map on the left here is of the impervious surfaces in the watershed. So that's mainly roofs and roads. And you can see it's just covered in these impervious surfaces. The main section kind of cross-cutting right through the middle of the subwatershed is the I-90 corridor, as well as Washington Street and all of the development along there. So why does that matter? Well, when we have a really urbanized or developed landscape, you can see that there's really changes to the hydrology and how water actually flows and actually the water cycle. So in an undeveloped landscape, when you have precipitation, about 50% of that water ends up going into the groundwater and infiltrating. And on the other side, in a developed landscape with a lot of these impervious surfaces, about 55% of that water goes into runoff, meaning directly into lakes and streams that eventually in our watershed make it to the Charles River and out into Boston Harbor. And the problem with this is that along the way, that water picks up all of the pollution that's on our streets and roads. And it's really coming from everywhere. And we call this stormwater runoff. It carries this pollution into the river and definitely worsened by leaky pipes. And the main pollutant that we worry about is phosphorus, which is a nutrient. And nutrients normally occur in the landscape and in our rivers, but the problem is when they are imbalanced. And with so much water being funneled directly into our rivers rather than sinking into the ground, that those nutrients can become in really high quantities in the river and cause issues like algal blooms and invasive plants, which really just throw the ecosystem off balance. And the main sources of this phosphorus in our watershed could be from things like leaves decomposing that aren't properly disposed of, fertilizers that people are putting on their lawns, different detergents, and then you have, like pet waste that doesn't get cleaned up and car oil and things like that make it onto the street that also cause harm in our ecosystem. So we have seen this with our water quality sampling in Cheesecake Brook. And we also have some sampling data about the habitat for any kind of bugs or fish that live in the brook. These are the results from several different assessments that we've done on the habitat. And you can see those two areas that are circled are really the sinuosity of the channel, the how curvy it is very poor because it's very straight, and generally creatures in the channel like to have lots of little nooks and crannies to hide in and live in. And also the banks of the channel are in really poor condition for wildlife to be supported as well. Most of them where they are exposed in the Albemarle corridor are mowed all the way to the stone banks right now with very little actual vegetation other than some trees that do provide some shade. And of course, all of this is happening within the context of climate change. So you all know from experience that in the Northeast, we are getting a lot wetter overall, and that wetness is occurring in the form of high intensity storms. And on the flip side, so we're getting the flooding with that as well as the drought. And this kind of weather whiplash causes issues not only for humans, but for the ecosystem as well. So luckily for us, we've worked with a group of many municipalities in our our Charles River Climate Compact, including Newton, who's participated to develop this flood model, which is really awesome. It's much more detailed than like a FEMA flood map and takes into account all of the different pipe infrastructure that's invisible and can really predict to a very small aerial degree of where flooding will occur in different storms that will happen in the future with climate change. So you can see the screen grab here from our model, and I invite you all to go on our website and explore it a little bit more. But you can see this corridor along Albemarle is one of the ones where we're going to get a lot of flooding, and especially in the field area. So we would need to mitigate that. And of course, you don't need a model to know that we get flooding in this area. It's pretty obvious if you've been paying any attention over the last few years. Here are some photos from recent storms where we've gotten a whole lot of water coming down this corridor very quickly. And of course, that's taken out, cars and the footbridge more recently. This is a big issue. And moving on to what we've done in the past. So if you all were around in February 2020, you might have seen me presenting in person in the field house next to Gath Pool right before COVID struck. And you all kind of wrote your ideas about what you observe on a Post-it note that we then compiled into this word cloud of things that folks around the area are concerned about in terms of Cheesecake Brook. So we participated or had kind of this public participation as part of this vision planning process, and had some engineering done as well to come up with some solutions, which is what we're building on now as part of this project. And some of those solutions, you may remember that we presented about, have to do with creating a curvier river, doing bank restoration, so really planting a lot of vegetation along the banks. And these are great pictures of a similar project that was actually done in Wellesley along Fuller Brook that we took some ideas from for this project. Great, I'll turn it back to Max.
Yeah, so thank you, Lisa. And I think I did a bad job mentioning this at the top, but if folks have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. And we've got a couple more, section breaks where we can take chat questions. But we're going to kind of move ahead into the work that's happening right now. So this year, the Charles River Watershed Association worked with the town of Newton to secure a coastal zone management grant, which I think is, a really fun, kind of interesting opportunity. I think if you live along the Albemarle corridor, if you live along the Cheesecake Brook, you may not think of yourself as being in the coastal zone, but you are. The nutrients that are coming out of Cheesecake Brook have a direct effect on Boston Harbor, and Cheesecake Brook, ancestrally, historically, was part of this, estuary and river system. It was a home for anadromous fish, and there were, connections between biological connections that were really clear between the harbor and up into this brook. So this grant kind of has three parts. One is habitat restoration planning. Then we're going to talk about kind of how we do what Lisa was describing. How do we get more water into the ground before it comes out the pipes into Cheesecake Brook? So Robert is going to kick this section off and talk about what we've seen as we've been walking the brook with an eye towards wildlife.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Max. So first off, I just wanted to, think big picture about river corridors and stream corridors. And here at CWA, we're really looking at them as corridors for wildlife and movement of sediment and woody debris. And as you can see from the photos here from the Nature Conservancy, wildlife use bridges and culverts to move through rivers and wildlife corridors, whether it's terrestrial wildlife or wildlife that are in the stream, like fish and other aquatic species. Next slide. And when we were at Cheesecake Brook, we did see some wildlife in the brook, including a goldfish here on the left, as well as um, a, uh, a frog on the right. And if anybody has seen any wildlife, feel free to put it in the chat. We'd love to hear what wildlife you have seen living in the corridor. Also birds. We've seen a bunch of birds when we were doing our site visits. Um, and also we heard a report of a muskrat. Next slide, thanks. And you may be wondering why we're looking at road stream crossing specifically. We really want to find um, help communities like Newton find problem areas to help upgrade for fish and wildlife passage, as well as flood mitigation. So these are not pictures from Cheesecake Brook, but from around the state. And, the problem we see in some areas of the state is when we build roads, we do culverts mainly just to move water through. Like the picture on the left-hand side, that's a picture from Dover, Mass. And then the picture on the right is from out in Western Mass in Ashfield, culvert that was replaced. And that's sort of what type of solution we want to see for fish and wildlife passage, as well as flood mitigation and the movement of sediment and things through the stream. So, the main message is we're really trying to think about this as a way for not only flooding, but also for the critters. Next slide. And through this process in the grant, we've been going throughout the Cheesecake Brook, looking at the various barriers to fish and wildlife passage throughout the whole corridor. So we're going to sort of start up from the top of the slide at the Charles River and move our way down to the south, or the bottom part of the slide, up towards Brayburn Country Club, just to orient everybody. Talking about the different barriers and such. And we're going sort of like if we were the fish coming from the Charles River up into the stream. Next slide. So starting in the beginning of the Cheesecake Brook at the Charles River, one of the structures we found, and I know many people are aware of this, is a concrete slab, and this concrete slab is pictured here on the left and the right, which at low flows, and this is a barrier to fish and wildlife at many flows, especially like the aquatic wildlife. And we discovered as part of our research that this piece of concrete is on top of an NWRA sewer pipe, and we really are thinking about this as a potential opportunity to improve fish passage and wildlife passage, but also if the MWRA were to do upgrades to the sewer line, working with them to address this barrier. This is a pretty significant barrier at the start of the brook, right near the Charles River confluence. Next slide. And this just shows the same area at a higher flow, and there's still a barrier to fish, as you can see with the concrete. It's very, very, very low. Even though the water is higher, it's only a couple inches of water. Next slide. This is, and then we looked at all the different bridges and culverts in the brook. And the first thing we see going upstream is the footbridges. And the first footbridge is at Nevada Street. And we found through our analysis that all the footbridges are not a major problem at all to aquatic species or fish and other wildlife. The critters can get right under there, and they're not really a problem. Next slide. The next thing we see in the Cheesecake Brook is a bunch of beautiful stone arched bridges and culverts. And we found through our analysis, we were out there with, tape measures and stadia rods, and we did all the measurements, and we found that these are not a significant barrier at all to fish and wildlife. So the fish and the wildlife can get right through there, no problem. And the streets include North Street, Craft Street, and Watertown Street. Next slide. The first barrier, other than this concrete slab I started talking about, is at Eddy Street. And this is a minor barrier that we found through our analysis with the culvert assessments we did. And also at a course level, it found that there would be no aquatic organism passage at this location because there's a drop, and the substrate at the bottom of the stream in that area is very there's a bunch of substrate and concrete in there, and this is a potential opportunity to do improvements whenever the city is looking to upgrade this bridge or replace it. It would be a great opportunity to look at renaturalizing the bottom of the stream so that critters can get through this area more easily. But this is something down the line. There's no plans currently, but it's something that we've identified as a potential opportunity. Also, there's a stormwater underground stream that comes out on the river right in this area. And the structures is in not the best shape, so I don't know where the city is thinking about this, but this is a potential opportunity for funding in this sort of realm in the future. Next slide. Then going farther upstream, we looked at the bridges at Parsons Street, Cross Street, and Dunstan Street. And all of these have no problems. They have naturalized bottoms. The critters can get through there. Fish and wildlife, no problem. But they're all pretty much the same type. But just instead of a stone arch bridge, they're just metal or stone bridges with no bottoms, which is great to see. Next slide. And now, where things get tricky is at Watertown Street. And this is likely the farthest extent of Fish and Wildlife Passage. We did see the goldfish just downstream of this area, but this is where the underground stream portion of Cheesecake Brook starts. And it's right at, like I said, Watertown Street. So it's likely that if fish did come up to this area from the Charles River, if the other barriers were solved, this would be sort of their farthest extent, most likely. Next slide. And this is just a picture showing the underground stream looking through a storm drain or an area where the water that from the parking lot here behind the police station is. So at that location, you actually look into the storm drain. You can see the stream running right underneath there. So just wanted to highlight that. This is where it runs underneath the ground, right behind the police station, and then continues up like towards Border Street and then under the pike and then farther upstream. Next slide. And you may be wondering, where does Cheesecake Brook start to get underground? And it's actually up at McGrath Field. I think many folks from past meetings have known that, but if you didn't know, there's actually an inlet pictured here where the underground stream from Cheesecake Brook goes into the underground culvert underneath McGrath Field and continues underground all the way to Watertown Street. So just wanted to highlight that. And we actually found that upstream of this section, there were actually some really, there were better riparian zones and a lot more tree cover upstream of here. Next slide. And the next potential, barrier, which was a moderate barrier and reduced aquatic passage, is the Commonwealth Avenue crossing. And you can see here on the left, that's the outlet. There's a little bit of a drop there as well as the inlet on the other side. So this is one that is another potential barrier, but it's very far upstream, so it's not as high a priority, obviously. And next slide. And then the other thing in the watershed, for people to know, there is a dam upstream. It's a non-jurisdictional, so it's not regulated by Office of Dam Safety, owned by the Brayburn Country Club. It's a recreational pond. I know some people have done kayaking there. And that's just another barrier. There's obviously no plans for this, and it's like a recreational impoundment. So you have some pictures there as well, privately owned by the golf course. Next slide. Moving up into the golf course, we did talk to the folks at the golf course and we didn't measure their culverts, but they do have a bunch in there at the golf course. They actually, when we talked to them, they did mention they have plans to do some wet meadow restoration and a national Audubon certification. And they've been thinking about their culverts and are hoping to enlarge them for better flood mitigation as well as wildlife passage. But it's very far up in the watershed, but just wanted to highlight that. That's where the Cheesecake Brook starts, is in the golf course. All right, next slide. And just to reiterate the summary here, thinking about all the barriers, in the Cheesecake Brook, they include, like I said, number one, the concrete slab, MWA. I think that's the number one thing coming from the Charles River. Number two, the Eddy Street Bridge. and then is obviously the underground stream, and then Commonwealth Ave, Culvert, and Brayburn. And sort of our findings we found, and we think that because of the underground stream portion, we should probably, and obviously we get feedback from everybody here, but we're thinking our initial thoughts is probably to focus on the barriers for fish passage downstream of the underground stream because that is such a large barrier. So that would be the MWRA slab as well as the Eddy Street Bridge um, crossings would be the ones that we would want to look at first. So yeah, so now I'm going to pass it back to Max to talk about stormwater.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Yeah, so fascinating to get to kind of go out and take that walk and see the headwaters in the golf club. So we're gonna shift a little bit from thinking about the habitat and the conditions in the stream to thinking about the water that's entering the stream and what we can do about it. How can we make sure that that water is not gushing into the stream and bringing a lot of sediment and bringing a lot of pollution. And the first chunk here is we're trying to be really opportunistic and seize an opportunity to do some infiltration as part of this Albemarle field project. So Luis is going to introduce that to us.
Thank you, Max, and thank you to the Charles River Watershed Association for partnering with us and really trying to take advantage of the current project that we're working on. And it's really exciting to think about the optics of this. So for those in the audience who aren't familiar with the Albemarle Field project, it is a multi-phase project. The gas pool is currently under construction, and you can see the locus on the mid right-hand side. Gas pool will be completed this June. Then we will quickly move to build phase one, which is the northern part of the field. And what you're seeing on the screen here is the Craft Street field and some of the green infrastructure that we're looking to implement there. So leading up to this and this graphic, the city has been working with its consultant and DPW in conjunction with Parks and Rec to dig up a few test pits. The red spots on the map are the test pits that we dug to really get a profile of the soils and drainage within those soils. We have also conducted 17 geotechnical borings up to 20 feet deep across the entire field, which will also give us a full profile of soils beneath the entire complex. And I have my colleague Eric here from the DPW who will talk about the findings of the soils here. But really, we're looking at intercepting the Crab Street drain line, bring it into a infiltration basin underneath portions of the field. We'll also be looking at possibly supplementing that storage capacity with a stone layer underneath the field as well. And then within the park, we'll be implementing, in this particular area, a bioswale to help with on-site stormwater management. Really, the goal is for the park to serve as green infrastructure, manage its own drainage, but also be able to help with reducing waters from entering the brook through gray infrastructure. And with that, I'll hand it over to Eric to kind of go over the watershed and some more details on the soils.
Thanks, Luis. My name is Eric Hires, and I am the environmental engineer for DPW. And I've had the pleasure of facilitating stormwater discussions and concepts between the Charles River Watershed Association and our Parks, Recreation, and Culture Department within the context of these Albemarle field improvements. So like Luis mentioned, we have this subsurface infiltration basin that kind of hugs Craft Street. And the purpose of that is to intercept that drain line that goes underneath the road and ultimately outfalls below the bridge into Cheesecake Brook. As Lisa mentioned earlier in the presentation, a large part of our stormwater problem is impervious area runoff. So using this field project to implement some more infiltration measures and intercept that very impervious area runoff problem is a huge tool that we can use to improve water quality within the brook. So, like I said, the idea is that it intercepts the drain line and then water goes through the infiltration basin to infiltrate back into the ground. Now, you can see in the top right corner that we have a map of the watershed that this basin is supposed to service. As you can see, it stretches up Craft Street and services parts of California Street as well as Fair Oaks Ave. Now, you can see the two test pits within that blue square. So those test pits yielded very beneficial soils that will help us infiltrate that stormwater runoff. Now, we're talking about potentially servicing 7 to 12 acres of runoff, and ultimately, to prevent any kind of backup or large rain events potentially clogging up the system, we have that overflow to allow excess water to go back into the drain line and ultimately reach Cheesecake Brook. Now, to complement that, we are considering a possible stone infiltration trench layer that stretches underneath the field. As you get further away from Craft Street, the soils might not be as great, so we are limited by that. And ultimately, we have that bioswale that will run along Albemarle Road to service any kind of stormwater runoff coming off of the field. And with that, I will give it back to the Charles River Watershed Association.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'll be presenting this next chunk, but it's really been done in total collaboration with Eric. So Eric, if you want to, if I get anything wrong, if you want to hop in at any point, you feel free. But we're kind of now going to talk about, okay, well, what else can we do, besides this great opportunity on Craft Street, what else can be done in the neighborhood? And just want to give folks a little insight into how we're approaching this question. So, every single drain, every single pipe that you see sticking into the brook has, an associated catchment area. It has a little portion of the neighborhood that it captures. And these areas range from, like 25 acres, like the Nevada Street area, to, much smaller, half acres or a couple acre areas. And kind of the name of the game with doing green stormwater infrastructure is we're trying to find the easiest and best projects to do first. We're trying to find the places where the pipe is at an elevation where we can grab it and still do something with gravity before we go into the brook. And we're trying to find places where there's enough room to, install some vegetation or a swale or bioretention. So what we're showing on this map are 16 different catchment areas that we took a look at. And in the teal color are the 6 that we've selected that seem really promising, seem like places where we could really do a good project. So this is like Nevada Street, Anthony Street, Joseph Road, Brookdale, and Maynard Street. And then as we go up above the Fessenden School, or below the Fessenden School, south of the Fessenden School, upstream of the Fessenden School though, we're really interested in that incredible drainage pipe that's shooting out and kind of eroding the banks into the river across from the phase 2 area for the Albemarle field. And just a little bit about what does this look like. We really want folks to start envisioning this because, this is going to be, we hope a public project, and, we really want to make sure that what we design and what we push forward are a set of ideas that the community is going to support. So I'm going to just show a couple pictures to help people kind of start to imagine what these systems could look like. The first are what we'll call bioswale borders. So these are systems that are kind of long and linear, and their purpose is to grab water before it goes into the storm drain. So these are going to be really important techniques to use between the road and the greened margin of the brook. That's a place right now where there's a lot of erosion. And I think it's easy to imagine a systematic kind of treatment that we can do along the brook, where we've created kind of a vegetated swale, maybe added some natural vegetation that attracts wildlife and is attractive, beautifies the neighborhood as well. A second kind of alternate idea is, instead of doing something where the water is just naturally running off into the bioswale, we can do something a little bit more engineered. That's like this picture on the right. This is a solution where you create a curb and direct all of the water into kind of a central location, which here looks like a little storm grate. And then that is connected, throughout this vegetated area. So these are two different approaches to accomplishing a similar goal. Another really important technique is to do these larger bioretention basins. So, the first thing that we're talking about is, okay, how do we find opportunities to grab the stormwater before it gets into the pipe? This is a second kind of idea, which is, how do we find an off-ramp for the water that's coming through the pipe and give it a place to soak into the ground in that green margin around the brook before it gets into the brook. So these systems would be sized to receive, the flow from small storms. Probably larger storms would still discharge right into the brook, but for smaller storms, for storms that are less than an inch, maybe less than half an inch, this would be a great alternative, and it's really going to be powerful for keeping sediment and keeping excess nutrients out of the river, out of the brook. And then finally, a kind of last set of solutions. These would kind of be the heaviest and the most engineered systems, but is to look at subsurface infiltration. Are there locations, within those 6 drainage areas where we can catch those pipes kind of upstream, within the neighborhood or a little bit upstream of the brook, and find some real estate, maybe beneath the road, maybe in some of the wide angled margins of the road, maybe associated with some of the existing traffic calming islands. And, these can be really great projects. They really work to get water into the ground and out of the pipes, and they can be paired very effectively with surface vegetation, with tree plantings, with native vegetation, to do something that can be really aesthetic and, can also be beneficial for traffic calming within a neighborhood. So hopefully that gives people some ideas of the types of solutions that we're thinking about. And as we develop these ideas further, we will be kind of reporting that out and looking for feedback from folks. So, that kind of concludes our formal presentation here. Thank you so much. The next steps with this project coming into the summer, we'll be completing the Coastal Zone Management Grant. So that means coming up with what we call 25% design for these distributed green infrastructure solutions. Those are designs that are going to have, a cost associated with them, so that we can start finding money to try and get them in the ground. The Craft Street design will be complete to be in sync with the rest of the phase 1 project. And we'll also be releasing a restoration plan, probably doing another public event to walk folks through what we think would be components of that plan. In the fall, Albemarle phase 1 construction potentially is going to be kicking off. And then, into 2025 and beyond, it's going to be about looking for funding, final design, and then starting to really roll out some of these BMPs. So with that, I'll just say, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for your interest in this project. And we'd really like to open it up to questions and conversation. So at this point, yeah. Feel free to. Yeah, thanks, Robert. Go ahead.
I'm gonna jump in here. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to highlight for people who may be on watching the recording, but wanted to thank everybody from the wildlife in the that section of the presentation who put comments in the chat about the wildlife that they've seen in sightings. I just wanted to highlight that for people who may be watching the recording. We heard from folks that they've seen fox, muskrats, turtle, bobcat, mink, fish, bumblebee, snapping turtle. So that's so exciting. I just want to thank everybody for sharing that the wildlife sightings. And if you haven't, feel free to put it in the chat. We just want to highlight that for anybody who's watching the recording or who's at home. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
Great. And before you get to the live questions, Max, we do have a couple of questions in the comment, which I can share with all the speakers. And then maybe we can open it up for folks to raise their hands and unmute after. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Thank you, Dira.
All right. So first question in the chat, and I think this is in reference to your section on GI, Max, specifically on the bioswale or the linear bioswales, questions about whether or not that would draw mosquitoes. I'm assuming in terms of having water kind of run off into the bowl of your bioswales.
Yeah, that's a great question. A very important component of designing these systems is making sure that they don't breed mosquitoes. So there's kind of strict design guidelines for doing these bioswales. They have to drain in a certain amount of time. They can't, have standing water. So absolutely, it's a good thing to be worried about, and that's something that is very much considered when designing these systems.
Great. And then another question came in about kind of more of a clarifying question about what's the difference between, or in terms of rating grass versus turf for impervious surface is the question. And I'm hoping that's the correct question they're asking. If not, feel free to clarify in the chat. But what is the difference in terms of rating grass versus turf for impervious surface? Or maybe they might be asking about pervious surfaces.
Well,
go ahead, Max.
Okay, I'll just say what comes to mind, and anyone can go anywhere else with this. But this is a bit of a wonky answer, but we all follow something called the Stormwater Handbook that the state issues. And in the Stormwater Handbook, in the new Stormwater Handbook, artificial turf field is going to be defined as an impervious surface. So, that's why doing a project like this is really important. And those bioswales and those infiltration chambers in Craft Street are going to help to offset that. But yeah, jump in, anyone else, if you interpret that question differently or.
Great, thanks, Max. And then this next question might be for Eric or Louise. Question about what about all the traffic, especially the 100 of overweight or 510 plus vehicles that use Albemarle Road each day? And this kind of came in at the end of the presentation, so could be questions around potentially about construction.
That road at all. I can take a crack at that question. Part of the overall vision for this area in Albemarle is also to implement a multi-use path along the back of Albemarle Field. So, aside from construction, that pathway is intended to help reduce cars and really get kids safely to school through the park. So we are, expecting that that'll help reduce traffic. That said, there are the school bus drop off and pickup at Albemarle, and that's a very critical drop off and pickup area for parents as well. So we have buses, parents, sports users, and a whole host of people really looking to use Albemarle. So we are looking to provide alternative modes of transit, help encourage bicycles instead of driving.
Great, thanks, Louise. Next comment we got, maybe Robert, you can help answer this, is could you say more about the slab? How deep is the sewer pipe and is it parallel to the river? There is a road island at Mosman and Maynard. It's on top of paved street, but could be dug out for a natural retention area.
Nathan
So
isn't there.
I can address so I don't know, Max, if you want to bring the slide back up. But the slab, I don't know how deep it is. I did talk to some people at the MWRA, but it is a sewer pipe that is running perpendicular to the Cheesecake Brook. So it's going east to west or west to east, I think, towards Deer Island. And so, yeah, and I think it would be, I don't want to comment on how deep it is, but I know it is a sewer pipe underneath that concrete slab, and it's something that we're definitely looking into there. So you can see the pictures there. So it's moving from right under there, perpendicular like this. The stream's going this way, pipe's going this way. So hopefully I answered the question there.
Thanks, Robert. All right, so next question, I think I'll open it up to all the speakers, so for whoever would like to respond. Question is, has there been any assessment of the anticipated storage volume, i.e. the interstitial space in the locations considered for streamside infiltration systems? I ask because the streamside margins are very narrow.
Yeah, I can talk about that quickly. The streamside margins are extremely narrow. They're about 25 feet and they're really, really sloped. So we're going to have to get creative. But the name of the game here is something is better than nothing. That is kind of the name of the game with these stormwater retrofits. So, if we were gonna all go back in time to the 1950s and kind of think about laying out this neighborhood, knowing what we know now, we do things very differently. But I think there's still some good opportunities to do some very meaningful projects, even in that narrow margin. And we've also had some conversations about, hey, are there places where we can come out into the road 3 or 4 feet, and do something that's traffic calming, and gives us a little bit more real estate to work with.
Great, thanks, Max. I see a hand up, so maybe we can put a pause on the submitted comments. And Arthur, if you want to speak up and ask your question, feel free to go ahead.
Yes, my question is, if we are interested in preserving nature and protecting nature's creatures, of which human beings are amongst those, why are we considering putting down an impervious surface, which is far from natural, when there is a very good natural alternative, natural grass? And not only that, that impervious surface that we're putting down leaches toxic chemicals and will leach them into the brook, which runs into the Charles River. Is this something we really want to do?
Thank you, Arthur.
Great
I'll
question.
take that question.
Thank you, Louise.
Arthur, I appreciate your comments and certainly understand your concern. You know, we part of the Albemarle project is the turf field is one component. We're also looking at adding a whole bunch of trees and finding ways to reinvigorate and add to the wildlife habitat that, you know, otherwise an entirely grassy field as Albemarle is currently doesn't provide. So we are looking at balancing, you know, the use that we get for the sports fields with ways in which we can help infiltrate stormwater and also enhance wildlife habitat. So, you know, the project itself is, you know, more than just a turf field. And we are looking at using as much of that real estate to help offset that and also enhance wildlife habitat, again, with trees, shrubs, and all that.
I would like to comment that there is no way you can possibly offset the disadvantages of the turf field. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Arthur. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. And there were similar questions regarding artificial turf in the comments. So I'm hoping answers from Louise help clarify that for some folks. All right. Let me see. Next question. Seems more, I think a little bit more of just a comment. If CRWA is thinking of changes at Eddy Street, I'd encourage contacting the staff of Newton's federally funded community development block grant program in planning about the CDBG funded park that starts at the Eddy Street Bridge and ends about halfway toward Watertown Street. The CDBG staff are all new since that project, but they might find out whether / how conditions imposed for that past federal funding affect current options.
That's super helpful. Thank you. But
Yeah.
go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. And I was doing some back and forth with this person, so thank you for the comments. If there's anything else to add, feel free to add that too. I think you had your hand raised, but yeah, I wanted to comment that I don't think the park, and I wasn't involved in this park project, but I don't think it did, from my knowledge, did do anything in the stream bed. But I think there'd be potential opportunities to look at, you know, federal, state, local funding for any bridge upgrades that could address things in the stream bed. But that's a great comment to work with the city folks on that. And I think it's something we would want to collaborate and make sure everybody would work on that, and also make sure it's a focus for the different you know, capital priorities for the whole city into consideration there. And I don't know if somebody had their hand raised. I don't know if they were all the hand.
Yeah, that was my comment. And I was just going to say, I think the design of that park actually assumed that those super straight stone walls would stay in place. And I'm just hoping going forward, the city will not invest any more money that assumes that. And so you can have some opportunities to think about alternatives to those super straight stone walls.
Thank you for the comment.
Great. Yes, thanks for the comment, Alice. All right, next question. Can you talk more about the plants that may be planted in the swales and riparian areas? Specifically, will they be native plants which will host wildlife, including native pollinators, or will they be more decorative?
I can answer the question as it relates to the field and park project. And just in general, more recent projects that we've completed and upcoming ones as well. We do strive, at least in Parks and Rec and culture, to implement native plants as to the greatest extent possible, and to what's available in nurseries. So at Crystal Lake, we renovated a park there and implemented a whole host of native shoreline restoration plants. So the goal is to have a more naturalized, wildlife-friendly landscape rather than a manicured landscape, if that helps the question.
Yeah, and I'll just double down on that about, you know, the bioswales. It's absolutely the kind of the concept, and the best way to do this is with native plants, and with native plants that are kind of, you know, let to grow in a kind of wild way. Obviously they have to be maintained a bit, but having, you know, that, I'll just say, you know, what we have seen out walking on Cheesecake is that some folks have already kind of done some really beautiful native plantings, and some of the plants that would do really well in a bioswale are already out there. You know, plants like that red osier dogwood, you know, rose mallow, which is our native hibiscus, is a plant that's flowering and great for pollinators and does really well in bioswales. Blue verlaine is another beautiful one, and then a lot of the kind of hardier native reeds and wet grasses are some other great plants for these situations.
Great. Another question came in about whether the project team has engaged with the Fessenden School in any of the discussions about the project.
Yeah, great question. I have not in this phase of the project.
We had in the original phase where we created the vision plan, we had reached out to folks at Fessenden and have talked more informally about this project, but we definitely need to re-engage now that we have a little bit more funding to move things forward.
Yeah,
and I'll just point out too that they have a great bioswale that's really functioning well along the Cheesecake Brook side of their property that separates their fields from the roadway, and that you guys can all look at. Doesn't look great right now, but in the springtime when things start greening up a bit, that's the kind of thing that you could imagine in more locations along this corridor.
Next question is, how will water tables be affected, and will basements flood more often as a result of this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to give a kind of glib answer to this question, but I'd like to open it up to hearing from folks. You know, these projects are going to be kind of small in relationship to the size of flows that we're seeing through the neighborhood. And they're going to be located kind of far away from most people's basements. So, you know, I think it's very safe to say that we wouldn't, you know, you're not going to see flooding in your basement because of, you know, these projects don't, as much as we would like them to do, just incredibly supercharged flow into the groundwater. They're not going to do that in a way that's really going to affect the water level in folks' basements. But I'd love to hear from people what types of basement flooding you are experiencing in the neighborhood. So if there are folks who live in this area who want to come off mute, we'd really love to hear that. Or just drop it in the chat.
I'll also mention, I think from our previous phase of this as well, folks mentioned the way that their flooding was happening. It sounded like it was mostly from high groundwater levels and really close to the Charles in particular. And to be clear, there's kind of two different types of flooding. There's that kind of flooding, and then there's the stormwater flooding, which is really like where you see the big swell right after the storm of flooding that kind of goes down quickly. And these projects will mainly mitigate that stormwater flooding portion.
All right, great. I see your hand up, Martin. Do you have a question or in response to Max's comment?
I have a question, somewhat related to what Arthur was saying earlier. Regarding the Fessenden area, that wasn't always a turf area. It used to be natural. Do you have any data as to the impact on runoff and floodwater from before and after they put in that field? Or actually multiple fields. You know, it used to be all grass on the Fessenden side of Albemarle Road, and now I think it's all impermeable surface. So do we know what the impact has been, and do the mitigation that was put in place, does that address the difference in the runoff?
I'll speak kind of ignorantly to this. I don't know specifically about that. I suspect that nobody's really monitored that really closely, but I suspect that it was considered when they sized the bioswales that they did install. And you know, I know there's a lot of concern about the artificial turf fields, and I will say that at least from the stormwater perspective, you know, the runoff is something that we really know how to deal with. And I don't want to be too controversial because I know this is a really hard issue. You know, CRWA, we feel that we would prefer folks not to be using turf fields, but we understand that municipalities have to make some really hard decisions about balancing, you know, land use and public access. So I'll just kind of speak for our group to say that in terms of stormwater runoff, we can absolutely deal with it. And I think that that's what was done with the Fessenden School project.
All right. Maybe I'll do one question from the comment, and then Bill will get to you with your hand up. Well, actually, I think this question, oh, sorry. Yeah, this next question. Any thoughts, maybe from the city side, about encouraging / incentivizing homes in the neighborhood to put in rain gardens?
You want to speak to that, Eric, or I can talk more generally about other things in the watershed, but
So I will touch on the city's stormwater management ordinance, and this kind of ties into the Fessenden School in that, you know, any private land that does do any sort of new or redevelopment and addition of impervious area, they are required by our stormwater ordinance to put in mitigation measures that are designed by engineers to withhold and store and infiltrate the cumulative runoff sized for the impervious area added. So you can certainly voluntarily install a rain garden on your property, should you see fit, but just know that the city does require, you know, that any new or redevelopment utilize these green infrastructure measures, whether they're rain gardens, bioswales, subsurface infiltration basins. So that is a requirement for any development.
I'll just say regardless of development or redevelopment, you know, CRWA encourages folks to put rain gardens, and we have a great resource of where is the best place to put that on your property, what that might look like, and I can drop the link to that resource in the chat as well.
And if I may add very briefly on that topic, so we have installed a few rain gardens at one of our parks that borders Crystal Lake. and a real easy way to communicate the importance of rain gardens is through interpretive boards, which we put at that rain garden, kind of explaining what the rain garden does, how it can increase wildlife habitat, with the goal that, perhaps at Albemarle or other places, we can implement something like this as well, but really help encourage folks to think about that type of garden in their own properties. So there's a lot of education that has to go into that as well.
And we did see some beautiful rain gardens and some really nice rain barrels out walking in the neighborhood. So some folks are taking the lead already, which is awesome to see.
Right. Bill, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hey,
Bill,
sorry, did I get it unmuted?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Hey, no, I mentioned, I was the one who put the chat in about the water table. And it's not it happens, I've been here forever, like 60 years. It's happened twice. It doesn't happen all the time. But when it does happen, it's a disaster. And I just hope there is some consideration if you're not draining as much into the brook and the ground's being saturated, it's not from runoff, it's from the water table of the ground being saturated by, say, a rainy October. That's usually when it happens. And then the water table comes up, and the next thing you know, your basement's flooded. So that's my concern on that. I think Max wanted to have some commentary. So not something that happens often, but I don't want it to happen often. So I'd be worried about that. I also put the question in about the traffic. Traffic's not just the school buses. There is unbelievable traffic on this street. No one cares about any of the traffic signals. Big trucks go right through Albemarle onto Watertown. And they're heavy construction vehicles, and it's not just from the Gath Pool project, although there's been hundreds and hundreds of cement trucks the last several weeks. But in general, there's always big trucks, N-Star especially. They're always using this street. So I was thinking of that. Look, I don't want the traffic, but they're also dropping oil all over the road, which is right next to the brook. So those are the two concerns I had.
Thank you so much, Bill.
You're welcome.
Bill, can I ask just about basement flooding? Is that something that this last year was pretty wet? Have you seen that last year?
It's got to take it. It's not something that happens often. It's got to be rain for a week, just constant rain. So the ground gets so saturated. But what you're sort of talking about is having the ground absorb more, do what it should do, is like a wetland type. But it can only absorb so much. And I'm just worried if you don't drain as much into the creek, into the brook, the ground gets saturated quicker, and then flooding would occur. That's my concern.
Yeah, totally get it. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I think that would be like our a wild success would be a situation in which we would have to start worrying about that, not to be too. And
I live right next to the brook, right next to it. So nice. If my house has water in it, the whole street does. That's all, but it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. I have a question in the chat, slightly off topic, but I think it's kind of a good one to just kind of have background knowledge about where does even the name Cheesecake Brook originate from. And I think I have an idea, but someone might correct me if I'm wrong, which is because I've done some historical mapping for Cheesecake Brook. If I'm not mistaken, there was just a property owner or a guy with the last name Cheesecake, I believe.
Oh, that's not what I thought.
Okay.
I heard differently as well.
Okay.
We might all have a different story.
I think Lisa Dady at Historic Newton probably has the most accurate info on that piece.
probably. There's definitely information out there, but maybe we don't have it.
Wait, who's gonna contribute?
Margaret, do you actually have an answer for that?
So the story I heard is that they used to picnic by the brook and bring cheese and cake, and that was why it was the Cheesecake Brook.
And that's what I heard too.
Me too.
I also heard that cake was like might have been an anachronism, and they might not have been eating cake. They might have been eating crackers that they called cake. That's the only addition I have to.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
It was like 19th century cake.
Right.
Right. Great question.
Oh, I just wanted to highlight in the chat. I've gotten some messages in the chat. I wanted to make sure we put it on the record for folks. Is that interest in providing more plantings along the stream? I did get some comments in the chat about that. Just want to highlight for people maybe watching the recording or didn't verbalize it. Just wanted to highlight that for everybody. And thank you for the comments.
Great. Another question is regarding whether or not our drinking water is impacted by stormwater runoff at this stage. And that may be a question for the city as well as the RWA.
So I might
Such a fun question. Go ahead, Louis.
I'll chime in from what I know. Eric, feel free to correct me, but I believe Newton gets all its drinking water from the MWRA, so it's all piped into the city. So there's no potable groundwater that people are drinking out of that, we know, or that we've permitted, to my knowledge.
Maybe I'll just add some color commentary because it's such a fun question, which, we're all kind of really lucky that we are on the MWRA system. Stormwater contamination is a big deal in other parts of the state. And one of the real ways that it's showing up is with this like PFAS contamination issue that maybe some folks have heard about. So the city of Cambridge, for instance, where I grew up, so I don't mind making fun of Cambridge a little bit. But they're proud of their own kind of private water source, but it's a water source that's crossed by Route 2, and Hanscom Airfield is within the sub watershed for their reservoir. So it is a real big issue in other parts of the state, and because we are all on MWRA water from the Quabbin, which has a very pristine watershed. RIP to all of the towns that got flooded during the making of the Quabbin, but we don't worry about stormwater runoff for our drinking water quality.
And just like to add on the MWRA, thanking them, because I'm living in Quincy now. Now I get MWRA water, and I was living in Boston too. But it is one of the cleanest drinking water in the country, and it's so it's very good water. I like it personally.
It's great water.
All right. Another really great question in the chat. Obviously, this project is going to do a lot to help improve the Cheesecake sub-watershed. But if someone was to live in the Cheesecake Brook watershed themselves, what can they do on their property to help the brook?
I've got kind of a pat answer for this. Someone talked about it already, but installing rain gardens on your property is an incredible thing that you can do for the brook. And the EPA just did this really wonderful study that they call holistic water management. And the question they asked is basically, what would it take to transform any property so that the water that moves through it would be moving through it the way it did before development, the way it would if it was a forest or if it was a meadow. And basically there was a really simple answer to the question. And the answer is if you can keep the first inch of rain that falls on your property, keep that first inch of rain out of the storm sewer, you are reproducing the pre-development, the kind of native hydrology that was in this area. So, you know, maybe you can do that. Maybe that's a bit ambitious, but that's, you know, that you can have a huge impact on water quality, especially if you do something and show your neighbors and inspire others to, you know, install rain barrels or dig rain gardens.
Yeah, I'm glad folks are interested in this, and I see, Daniel, your comment, putting the link in the chat. I'm looking through our website, and we actually, it's changed up a little since I knew that where that link was. So I'll make sure we have it on PDF. I'll make sure that goes in a follow-up email so that everybody listening to the recording and who signed up on the Zoom has access to that.
And just to piggyback on that response as well, you can voluntarily install stormwater containment structures and systems on your property, such as rain gardens or anything subsurface. You can work with a private civil engineer to get a better sense of the amount of impervious area on your property, and they can help design a custom system to retain up to 100% of that impervious area runoff. And like Max said, for voluntary installs, you know, just capturing that first flush is huge for reducing nutrient pollution. And if you do have stormwater systems on your property, I highly recommend that you take the time to give them a look, inspect them, and make sure that they are functioning appropriately, because over time, these systems can accumulate sediment, and that impacts their ability to infiltrate the stormwater back into the ground.
And just to be really specific, if you've got a driveway and you see that you have one of those little grates and drains in between your driveway and the sidewalk, chances are you may have a, you know, engineered stormwater system. So, you know, take the time to keep that gutter clear of sediment, and then maybe take a little bit of extra time to learn about what that system was and what maintenance it might need beyond that.
And just to go off of what Lisa was saying, we are doing some website updates, and I'm going to put in the chat. We do have it on our public share drive, and I will put the link to some of our educational resources on stormwater at your own property in the chat in just a second.
Great. Another question that came in through the chat, I think this is for the city, questions regarding whether or not the city will address some of the illegal parking happening besides the brook with this project.
That's a great question. I guess without having the funding or a fully fledged design, it's hard to say, but one good option to, you know, help mitigate that would be to install actual granite curbing along the brook sides to help mitigate or reduce cars parking on the brook, which leads to compaction, erosion, and so on and so forth. So just an idea of how that could work. We also would have to look at drainage and continuity of drainage patterns, but those are all things that could be figured out under the right planning process.
Great, and I see in the chat some different folks adding some commentary about where they might be experiencing flooding, or that they might have not seen their street on the map that was shared earlier in the slide deck. I do want to add that if you do check out the Charles River flood model, which I've included the link in the beginning, but I can include it again, you will be able to look at your street and see flooding model for different storm scenarios. And I'll also add that our project team for that specific model are working to upgrade it in this kind of next phase with higher or better kind of storm predictions. And so feel free to kind of keep an eye out on our newsletter about updates to that model so you can see and make sure that you can look around your neighborhood and see where flooding is happening and expected to happen. There was also another comment in reference to conversations about rain gardens. It sounds like providing a financial incentive for people to put in rain gardens could be a very cost-effective part of this project, which I think is a really great comment. And as an aside, CRWA is working on different types of projects like that in different municipalities that we work on, whether that's to incentivize rain gardens or to incentivize the use of rain barrels on private property.
And I'll jump in to answer that as well, is that the City of Newton does currently issue a flat rate stormwater utility fee to all of its residents quarterly. Now, if you do voluntarily install stormwater structural control measures to mitigate the impervious area on your property, you are eligible to apply for a reduction in that fee. We do, however, require that anyone who does apply for these abatement credits, that they do keep up to date with the maintenance of their system.
Great. Well, there's 5 minutes left to our time here. I do want to make sure that there's also space for folks to verbally share any other questions or comments with our team. If you do, feel free to raise your hand and unmute. And I'll also leave it open to the speakers to add any last minute things as well.
First off, thanks, Dira. I just wanted to thank, this was a very abundant meeting. I think we clocked up, Dira was telling me 46 people. I saw 44. So I want to say thanks everybody for coming and for sticking around. And we have 31 people here on 8:25 p.m. on a Thursday night. So just want to reiterate, I know other folks have said thank you so much for all the feedback and for coming out tonight. But yeah, any other questions too?
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for caring about and taking care of Cheesecake Brook. And we will be following up with this group to, send out the slides and some resources we've got the names of everybody who came and attended and the names of folks who signed up but didn't attend. So you'll get an email from us in a little bit. And please stay in touch. You've got our contact information. We want to hear from you. If you've got ideas, if you've got concerns, if you have a picture of a fox or a muskrat, we want to see it. So thank you so much. And if you see us walking around along the brook, come by and say hello. And I'll leave it at that. Have a lovely evening.
Great. Thanks, everyone.